Tim Southee has been really good for a long time. He was bowling for New Zealand before the first iPad was in circulation. You may not even remember his first test, partly because it was just so long ago. When he was 19, he took 5 for 55 before smashing 77 off 40 balls, hitting 9 sixes. But in between that great start and a few years ago, Southee was always good and constant, but very rarely the story. But as New Zealand have become a sneaky top team, whatever you've been thinking about Tim Southee, he's a lot better now. Over the last few years, Tim Southee has taken a very average record and shrunk it. But let's just look at that first almost decade of Tim Southee's career. He took over 200 wickets in this period, but his overall average was just okay. Like if you look at this, other than 200 wickets, which obviously is an incredible amount of wickets on its own, there's nothing here that really makes him look good or stand out. Here's Peter Siddle. At this point in their careers, Peter Siddle's record was actually better than Southee's. Despite being a first change bowler in Australia, which is far harder than bowling seam with the new ball in New Zealand. And yet their figures were pretty much the same. There's nothing wrong with being compared to Siddle, it's just that Southee had always hinted at being a lot better than that. But I think the most interesting bowler on this list for Southee is Ishant Sharma, who is also the most interesting bowler on this list. They both started as gawky teenagers, but were kept in the team despite ups and downs. And at this point, both had over 200 wickets. The only real difference is where they had to bowl. In this era, the 4 toughest places to bowl seam, and no one is going to be shocked here, are Asia. And India was the second worst. This might shock you a bit more. Over that near decade, New Zealand was also a very tough place to bowl seam. Despite us all remembering and talking about the green tops, Kiwi pitches have been flat for a very long time now. So this is how much better they are than averages in their country over that period. The only reason Southee didn't get the Ishant treatment from Kiwi fans is because there aren't as many Kiwi fans, and because his numbers look better. They were in many ways really similar players, but when one of you averages high 30s and the other one low 30s, one always gets a pass. But the other bowler worth looking at around Southee's wicket tally is Trent Boult, who for a very long time was seen as the better of the two bowlers, and on this record, Boult certainly edges him. These two came through the New Zealand under-19 system together, and they once destroyed Malaysian cricket pretty much on their own. Boult started about a year and a half after Southee in tests, so they have roughly bowled on the same pitches and to the same players throughout their career. And you would say that the difference between the two of them is pretty similar to that between Broad and Anderson. I think that no matter how much you respected Tim Southee in this period, if you were watching Boult play a lot, you just thought he was better. The same way that you could admire Broad's record without ever thinking he was a better bowler than Anderson. The hero and sidekick roles were very well defined in these situations. And while we're talking about Anderson, well, he's been pretty damn good since the start of 2018. And what do you know? So has Tim Southee. But then again, so has everyone. And the problem for Southee getting noticed in this era is that there just has been a lot going on in the world of seam bowling over the last few years. This is all the bowlers with over 50 wickets of seam. And I'll give you a minute to soak in what I think is one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen. Not a single one of them averages over 30. Shaheen Afridi is the closest, but he just scrapes in. We have more bowlers on this list averaging under 20 than over 30. And most of them are under 25. And you can see bowlers here like Suranga Lakmal. He's a career high record bowler, and yet he still manages to command a comfortably sub 30 record here. Southee's average is incredible, and yet still only good enough to get him in at 5th. And let's be honest, there are big 3 bowlers right in front of him and right behind him, and they tend to get a lot more attention. But it's not just the big 3. On this list are a few West Indians. There's also Kangisa Rabada and his world's fastest strike rate. There's 3 Pakistanis as well. There's a lot to talk about here. And what about the ICC Test bowling rankings? 3 of the top 20 bowlers in this are spinners. This is a seam bowling era like we probably haven't seen in a very, very long time. And we haven't even mentioned his own team. This is a better bowling attack than when New Zealand had Richard Hadlee. Tim Southee might be the 3rd highest wicket taker in New Zealand cricket, but right behind him is Trent Boult, and in 6th spot is Neil Wagner, who has not only taken a lot of wickets, but is basically the Picasso of modern seam bowling. Sure, all these guys play a lot more tests now, and New Zealand players are much more professional, so they don't retire early like in previous generations. But to have 3 bowlers of this quality at one time is remarkable. And then, what do you know? Kyle Jamieson comes along. Obviously, Jamieson won't continue to average 15 or 16 in Test cricket, but when you combine his skill, height and batting, he's clearly a hard cricketer to ignore. Southee may have the 3rd most wickets ever for New Zealand, but he might also get the 3rd least press in his own bowling lineup. And just to go back to this ICC list before, I flashed it up and whipped it away quick. But look at number 3 again. It's only the bloke this whole video is about. There is no doubt that even if you guys have a better bowling average of recent times, Tim Southee's overall impact has been incredible. This is how much better Southee has been in the last 3.5 years compared to that almost decade before. And from this alone, it is hard to argue that he's a completely different bowler now. But there needs to be some context to this. The global seam bowling average has dropped from 33 to 27, but Southee's dropped from 31.5 to 22. Even in a great bowling era, his improvement was far more than normal. This isn't just a case of him getting more wickets in an easy era. In fact, this is really interesting. This is the bowling averages for seamers in New Zealand in that period Southee was ordinary, and then in the Super Southee period. The bowling averages really haven't changed there much at all. Seam bowlers have done no better of recent times, but Southee has. And most of Southee's problems used to be when he bowled away from home. He averaged almost 34 away from home in his last 6 tests away from, and yeah, New Zealand don't really travel that much, so we don't have much to go on. But in those last 6 tests, he's averaging 20. They include a test in the UAE, 2 in Sri Lanka, and 2 in Australia. None of that's a really easy ride. And because he has only played 6 tests away, that means he's done most of his best work at home, when the pitches haven't got any better for seam. He's improved in the one non-Asian place where seam bowling has stayed the same. And being that his away record wasn't exactly pitch or ball dependent either, that makes his improvement even more remarkable. But there is something else incredible about Southee. He's in no way a modern bowler. His type of bowler, the outswing dependent low 80s guy, is really not much of a thing now. In fact, the last truly successful one was probably Matthew Hoggard, who played his last test in the series that Southee made his debut. Ben Hilfenhaus had some success but was quicker, or at least he was before the injuries. And Jimmy Anderson has a record amount of success, but again he was quicker and he probably just has more skills to move the ball both ways and do other tricks that Southee is only starting to catch up with now. But throughout the 50s, 60s and 70s, outswing was the main skill you wanted in a bowler. That was until the West Indies came in with a combination of pace and height, and it turns out that while the ball can stop swinging, people don't really stop being tall and fast. Outswing will always stay a good delivery, but the kind of automatic outswingers like Terry Alderman, Richard Hadley, Kapil Dev, Jacques Kallis, Craig McDermott, Damien Fleming and Hoggard just don't seem to come through cricket anymore. Depending on who retires first, Jimmy Anderson, probably, or Tim Southee, possibly, they may end up as one of the last ever true automatic outswing bowlers. And this is not the only old world thing about Southee's cricket. He's still a slogging tail ender. He's not getting behind the line or trying to bat for the guy at the other end. Since his career began, he's the world's second quickest scorer. It's Virender Sehwag and then Tim Southee. I mentioned before that 77 in his first test, where he actually suggested that he had all-round talent. Well, since then he's only made 4 more 50s. He really is a very entertaining, old-school, slogging tail ender. It's beautiful to watch. There's something else quite old-worldly about him. He fields it slip to seam bowlers. And that's really not a thing for modern seamers. Almost all the seam bowlers who field at slip are generally all-rounders, or at least have a lot of all-round talent to them. It's really rare to be a frontline seamer who fields at slip to other seamers. Jimmy Anderson has done it a little bit, but really he does it more for spin. There are 4 specialist bowlers with over 50 catches during Tim Southee's career. Anderson is one, Lyon and Swan are the others. But if you take out all those batters and all-rounders and just look at the bowlers and specifically the catches per match they take, you have Graham Swan first, which makes sense, and then Tim Southee second. And really other than Anderson, everyone else is miles behind. Spinners in slip aren't quite as rare. We saw Warne do it for a generation, Headley Houth did it for New Zealand back in the day. But it's just not as common to see seamers do it. Terry Alderman and Mike Hendrick and Chris Old did it in the 70s and 80s. But frontline permanent slips generally aren't seam specialists. So to have a seamer who is as good a slip fielder as Southee is a massive advantage. And remember, his catches per match aren't that high, partly because he's missed out on a lot of catches from himself. But all this isn't talked about enough, perhaps because Southee isn't talked about enough. Sure, we all laugh when he destroys England every now and again, and most people would have said he was a quality bowler even before the 300 wickets, but there just always seems to be a bigger story around. He does have moments of brilliant madness where everyone looks at him. You know, those days where it seems like he's the only one who's going to get any wickets. But he's an odd guy to sort of fit in. He's tall, but he's not that tall. He's fast medium and certainly not much faster than that, even if he actually managed to put some speed on. He's got a bouncer, but he's not really a bouncer bowler. And he has a personality, but he's not exactly Merv Hughes or Sreesanth. He's just a really good above average bowler. But for more than a decade and 69 tests, Southee was still averaging over 30 with the ball. And now his average is in a glorious freefall. Even in the global seam playing pandemic, he's been extraordinary. And there's one other thing that's really interesting. Tim Southee has always been a new ball bowler. He was a great new ball force, but he often struggled later in the innings. And that was part of the reason he often wasn't as useful in other countries. In the last 3 years, he's improved a lot with the new ball, but he's actually been even better with the old ball. Till the start of 2018, Southee averaged 31 with the ball from overs 40 to 80. Since then, it's been 16.5. That's a thing that happened. Now, part of this might have been helped by the fact that Wagner has been bouncing everyone to death, or at least bouncing them to boredom, and Southee can nip in. But it's quite clear that Tim Southee has completely developed his game. He's such a smart bowler now. He has the wobble seam. He quite often comes wide on the crease. He's very good with his straight ones. And he's just found a way to take wickets even when the ball doesn't swing. But most of us just haven't noticed. It took New Zealand a very long time to start getting noticed as a team. And then there's been so many players that have been undervalued. Wagner and Watley, Latham, Nichols. And Southee has always been able to bowl deliveries just like this. The kind of balls that even make the non-striker laugh. It's just of recent times, he's been really good at getting wickets with just normal deliveries as well. And he also just gets on with it. Like, this is a celebration of his 300th wicket. In the first part of his career, he bowled a lot of supernatural balls that sometimes got wickets, but they always look pretty. Now, he still bowls a lot of pretty balls, but he just takes a lot more wickets.